Next on Currents News, the Mass of Hope and Healing. Brooklyn's Bishop Nicolas DiMarzio will be celebrating it shortly. Shots are fired on the streets of Caracas, Venezuela after calls for a military uprising to force Nicolas Maduro to go. Thousands coming together to remember the victims of the Poway synagogue shooting. The suspect is going before a judge. Joe Biden is using Barack Obama in his newest campaign ad after saying he didn't want the former president's endorsement. St. John's University political expert Brian Brown joins us to weigh in on the race. The news starts right now. The Mass of Hope and Healing. Brooklyn's Bishop Nicolas DiMarzio will lead the powerful service for victims of sexual abuse tonight. Good evening, I'm Emily Druby. Liz Faublas is off. The liturgy is planned by survivors for survivors and all those impacted by the sexual abuse crisis. The Mass is now in its 5th year and will be celebrated at St. Athanasius Church in Bensonhurst. Currents News' Tim Harfman is there. Tim?
Emily, survivors of sexual abuse planning tonight's Mass of Hope and Healing picked Father Jeffrey Dillon to give the homily. The Queen's priest has a strong message of support for victims.
There's an opportunity for healing specifically in their life.
A message of solidarity Father Jeffrey Dillon plans on expressing to abuse survivors during tonight's homily. The Mass of Hope and Healing is an annual liturgy offered for everyone impacted by sexual abuse. The Mass, planned by the Diocese of Brooklyn's Survivors Advisory Committee, includes survivors, family, friends, and other associated victims, plus professionals in abuse protection. The committee asked Father Dillon to be the homilist because he, too, is a survivor.
I have a unique perspective, being a victim myself, to identify with them, but also speak to them and challenge them to recognize that there is hope behind the devastation and the brokenness that they've experienced in life.
Father Dillon endured abuse at the hands of a priest in the late 1950s and early 1960s, when he was an elementary Catholic school student. Father Dillon says the church must face the reality that the crisis is part of its history.
It's not something that we have to deny, nor something that we have to cover up, nor something that we have to forget, but it is something that we can utilize in healing others, because we can bring our own brokenness to the situations that we encounter on the journey of life.
From the readings to the music, every part of the Mass is chosen by survivors. Bishop Nicolas DiMarzio is the main celebrant and says this 5th annual Mass of Hope and Healing is another step in addressing the crisis.
Unfortunately, it's a phenomenon as part of our society today that is a very difficult one. It's been there for a while, but I think now we acknowledge it. And we do need to pray for healing and hope for these people.
Though it's something they cope with in their lives, Father Dillon says victims of abuse are not alone.
With the help of God's Spirit working in people's lives, they can overcome.
And for the first time at the Mass of Hope and Healing, the Diocesan Survivors Advisory Committee will light the Easter candle and pray for the victims of abuse who died this past year. In Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, Tim Harfman, Currents News. Back to you, Emily.
Tim, before we let you go, will there be professional services available for survivors at the Mass?
Yes, there will be a team of professionals on hand for anyone who wishes to come forward or who just wants to talk.
Please stay tuned to Net TV for live coverage of the Mass of Hope and Healing. It begins immediately following Currents News. Tensions are sky high in Venezuela tonight with violence on the streets. The unrest sparked by a call for the military to rise up and kick out strongman Nicolas Maduro. Camila Bernal reports on the latest on the fast-breaking story and how the Trump administration is handling the chaotic situation.
Gunshots, protests, and chaos as the leader of Venezuela's opposition, Juan Guaidó, declares the start of the end for President Nicolas Maduro. He's calling it Operation Freedom, asking the country's military to join and telling his supporters to take to the streets. During Tuesday's demonstrations, Guaidó standing next to newly freed Maduro opponent Leopoldo López. López, who was under house arrest, signaling the support of parts of the military. But Maduro not backing down, taking to Twitter to say that he's met with regional defense bodies which have expressed total loyalty. Meanwhile, in Washington, President Trump tweeting that the United States stands with the people of Venezuela and their freedom. This as the administration voices support for Guaido.
This is an act of bravery by Guaido and others, really for the freedom of the Venezuelan people.
National Security Advisor John Bolton saying all options are on the table, but says the focus right now is on a peaceful transition of power from Maduro to Guaido.
The sooner Maduro is gone, the sooner is the possibility of justice and real economic growth for the Venezuelan people.
Camila Bernal, Currents News.
The call for the military to oust Maduro unleashed a flurry of Molotov cocktails and bullets. Reporter Stefano Pozzebon reported from the front lines after Guaido demanded an end to the Maduro regime.
This triggered an intense standoff with the live shots being fired. As you can see, these are the live shots that have been fired on both sides from both forces loyal to Nicolas Maduro and those who have taken the side defective against the embattled Venezuelan leader and taking the side of Juan Guaido.
Pozzebon also reports that the airbase where he reported from is still in the hands of Maduro loyalists. Now the latest on the synagogue shooting in Poway, California. The suspect, 19-year-old John Ernest, was in court today. He's facing a murder charge for killing a woman and 3 counts of attempted murder after opening fire in the synagogue this weekend. He's also charged with arson, accused of setting a fire to a mosque last month. For the first time since the synagogue shooting, his family is speaking out, saying, like our other 5 children, he was raised in a family of faith and a community that all rejected hate and taught that love must be the motive for everything we do. How our son was attracted to such darkness is a terrifying mystery to us. There was a powerful message from the thousands of people who packed an outdoor field in Southern California Monday night. They joined together to remember the victims of the Poway synagogue shooting.
Look at you. You are beautiful.
Before the sunset, nearly every seat in the stadium was filled. People of the Jewish, Christian, Muslim faith, people of Poway.
We are all one family on this one planet.
Sad. I was feeling sad.
Scott Cohen speaks for most when he says he's got a heavy heart.
The message is clear and it's true, and I agree. There is no room for hate, and it does start with each and every one of us.
And for moments, an even higher message prevailed, spoken by multiple faiths.
You asked the Baptist Pentecostal preacher to come and to speak for only 3 minutes. Okay, I'll try that. I want you to turn to that person that's next to you. And I want the 4,000 people that are in here tonight to say I love you to that person that's next to you.
Hate is so divisive, and this is really about turning to one another. And I think it was one of the pastors said, we have to tell each other we love each other. And so I just feel really connected.
It was a point of emphasis that the vigil be at Poway High School, where young minds are molded to try and remind one another that there's no place for hate.
This land was made for you and me.
And so it was only fitting that a community grasping for strength wrapped its arms around one another to show love.
Everyone's having their arms around each other and singing "This Land Is Your Land" is just really inspiring. And I feel like in times like this, you can't help, you have to be inspired, otherwise it can be really tough.
Yisrael Goldstein, the rabbi of the Poway synagogue, says fear won't stop him from holding services. At least one of the suicide bombers in the Easter church bombings in Sri Lanka was trained by the Islamic State at a base in Syria. Authorities identified Jamil Muhammad Abdul Latif as one of the bombers. He allegedly traveled to Syria in 2014, where he met with ISIS recruiters and trained for 3 to 6 months before being sent back to Sri Lanka, his home country. ISIS has claimed responsibility for the bombings. President Trump could soon designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a foreign terrorist organization. The Egyptian-based group has been linked with previous attacks across the Middle East. Trump is working with his national security team and leaders in the region before deciding on labeling the Brotherhood. Today at the White House, the president met with top Democrats. They plan to talk about rebuilding America's infrastructure and maybe rebuilding political trust. Omar Jimenez reports.
Democratic leadership emerging from an infrastructure meeting with President Trump seemingly satisfied.
Building infrastructure of America has never been a partisan issue, and we hope to go forward in a very nonpartisan way for the future.
In their words, the big and bold proposal would invest not only in roads, bridges, highways, water, and more, but also in broadband and the power grid.
There was goodwill in this meeting, and that was different than some of the other meetings that we've had.
And the tone of previous meetings between these three definitely has been different.
I will shut down the government.
Okay,
absolutely.
fair enough.
And I am proud, and I'll tell you what, I am proud to shut down the government for border security, Chuck.
But Tuesday's positive tones come amidst multiple ongoing investigations into the president in the wake of the Mueller report.
In previous meetings, the president has said, if these investigations continue, I can't work with you. He didn't bring it up.
The group settled on a number of $2 trillion for the infrastructure package.
We're very pleased with the positive attitude toward recognizing the trillions of dollars of need.
And they're set to meet again in 3 weeks to discuss how exactly that money will be spent and how to pay for it.
This was a very, very good start, and we'll see. We hope it will go to a constructive conclusion.
In Washington, Omar Jimenez, Currents News.
There is no more room at the border. That's the message of Acting Homeland Security Chief Kevin McAleenan. He went before Congress this morning looking for money to deal with the flood of migrants crossing into the U.S. this year.
Simply put, the system is full and we are well beyond our capacity. We don't have room to hold them. We don't have the authority to remove them fairly and expeditiously, and they are not likely to be allowed to remain in the country at the end of their immigration proceedings.
McAleenan wants money for temporary and semi-permanent migrant processing facilities. The city of El Paso, Texas is acting to cope with the growing number of migrants at their border, giving the city manager more money. Almost 55,000 migrants have passed through El Paso since January. City officials say they have spent about $36,000 on the influx to care for the migrants after ICE dropped them off unannounced. Now the El Paso city manager is authorized to spend more money at least until June 25th. There's a lot more news headed your way. Election 2020, Joe Biden on the campaign trail as President Trump gears up for the race. St. John's University political expert Brian Brown is moments away to weigh in. A big step in the rebuilding of Notre Dame. You'll see what's happened on top of the cathedral. They are recognized around the world for their uniforms and they protect the Pope. What an officer has to say about being a Swiss Guard. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. The newest Democratic candidate for office, Joe Biden, has released his latest campaign video featuring a very familiar face.
This is an extraordinary man.
The video, titled "America, Anything is Possible," shows former President Barack Obama presenting Biden with the Presidential Medal of Freedom back in 2017. This ad is out after Biden said he didn't want Obama's endorsement. He claimed that whoever wins the Democratic nomination should get it on their own merits. Another Democrat getting strong polling support, Senator Bernie Sanders, says there are a lot of differences between himself and Biden.
I think when people take a look at my record versus Vice President Biden's record, I helped lead the fight against NAFTA. He voted for NAFTA. I helped lead the fight against PNTR with China. He voted for it. I strongly oppose the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He supported it. I voted against the war in Iraq. He voted for it.
The first time the Dems face voters will be in Iowa at next February's caucuses. Joe Biden, as measured by most polls, is the front-runner for the Democratic nomination to go up against President Trump in the 2020 election. Biden is Catholic, but he's a controversial one, differing with fundamental church teachings on abortion. Joining us now to talk about him and the whole campaign is St. John's University's Assistant Vice President for Government Relations, Brian Brown. Welcome, Brian. Joe Biden has said his faith is central to his life, but he refuses to accept the church's teachings about the the sanctity of life. He's a vocal supporter of abortion. What's the likely impact of that difference on his chances in the primaries?
Well, in the primaries, he's facing other Democratic candidates, including several other Catholic Democratic candidates who all share his pro-abortion views. What's interesting about Biden is, to your point, he really identifies his Catholic heritage and Catholic identity. That's an important part of his character. And how that plays out on the campaign trail and how he messages that could be a deciding factor for many Democratic primary voters.
If Joe Biden does win the nomination, how would he stack up against President Trump on the issues Catholics care most about?
Well, it's going to be a mixed bag. I mean, Joe Biden and his 40-year voting record, he has been supportive of issues like the rights of the poor, the marginalized, the immigrants, and that's an important issue for many voters of all stripes. Many Catholic voters will also be looking at the Supreme Court nominees, and if you re-elect President Trump and there's a vacancy, what that means for many of the hot-button social issues. So Catholic voters, like all voters, will have to look at the voting records, look at the elected officials, and really cast an informed and conscious decision.
Is there anyone else in the Democratic field that Catholics should be paying attention to?
Kirsten Gillibrand here from New York is Catholic, Castro from Texas, Tim Ryan from Ohio. So they're all, I mean, if you're a real in-tune Catholic voter, you'll be looking at some of their voting records. But I think Catholics will look at many times what's most important to them. Is it social issues? Is it the economy? Is it foreign policy? All informed issues for informed Catholic voters.
Joe Biden harshly criticized President Trump in his presidential announcement video. Senator Bernie Sanders, no Trump fan, has urged a different approach. Let's listen.
I like Joe Biden. Joe is a friend of mine. But I think what we need to do with all of the candidates, have a issue-oriented campaign, not personal attacks.
What's your take on Sanders versus Biden?
Two 70-year-old gentlemen fighting it out. There's going to be real differences, and they both have a long career in politics, and they will cast some of those differences. Sanders has already come out and pointed out issues where he split with Biden, the war in Iraq, free trade agreements, some other votes over the years. But I think what you have is really two big-name, nationally known candidates fighting it out for a share of voters, and anything goes in politics.
If you looked into a crystal ball, who runs against Trump and who wins?
Great question. I think time will tell. I think, Joe Biden has really positioned himself for the general election, but he really has to get through a tough Democratic primary where some people were going to be looking at his voting record. He may not be the progressive thing that a lot of Democratic primary voters are looking for these days. So certainly he's got to make it through the primary first. If he does, then, middle-class Joe from Scranton, Pennsylvania does resonate with a lot of those swing states.
Brian, thank you so much for your time and for your insight.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
The job of a Swiss Guard is highly prized. Their work is to protect the Pope, no matter what the cost. The Guard is consistently looking for new recruits. One officer describes what can be tense work.
Every 6th of May, there was a solemn air in the St. Damasus courtyard in the Vatican. It is the day when the new recruits of one of the oldest armies in the world swear to protect the Roman pontiff at the cost of their lives if necessary. Vice Corporal Officer Didier Grandjean opens the doors to the Swiss Guards headquarters, the world's smallest army. He started serving there in 2011.
I saw a flyer in 2006 advertising the 500th anniversary of the Swiss Guard. From there, I always wanted to join this military corps.
Didier takes us to the armory and tells us that today, this force is made up of just over 100 soldiers. They take turns guarding some of the Vatican's entrances. They are present at the big events held in the square, and at night, they guard the Pope's apartment. One of the last times they had to perform their duties was in December 2009, when this woman lunged at Benedict XVI.
There are other tense moments. For example, people come saying they want to see the Pope and do not understand that it is necessary to follow a procedure.
Just as Didier joined the Swiss Guard through a promotional campaign, this small army is in constant need of new recruits. To be part of this corps, you need to be a Catholic man, have Swiss citizenship, be under 30, be at least 5 feet 8 inches tall, and have an impeccable reputation. In addition, they ask candidates to have gone through the Swiss Army before. These men lead a fully fledged military life. It's a combination of discipline and religious training. The fame of this army increased after the bitter sacrifice made by 147 Swiss soldiers who died defending Pope Clement VII during the looting of Rome in 1527.
The new class of Swiss Guard recruits will be sworn in at the Vatican in a special ceremony next week. The Vatican's women's magazine has a new leader and a new board. Italian journalist Rita Pinci has been appointed the head of the editorial board, a little over 1 month after the magazine's founder and former director Lucietta Scarafia resigned, along with her entire editorial staff. The monthly magazine will be published as usual. Still to come on Currents News, progress in the rebuilding of the Notre Dame. Something big is now on top of the Catholic Cathedral. Hear what Pope Francis is telling hairdressers and beauticians at the Vatican he wants their help. And the tablet has a brand new page called Our Diocesan Family, where you can share your pictures of recent baptisms, Holy Communions, confirmations, marriage, all of the joyous sacraments. For more details and to submit your photos, go to thetablet.org/OurDiocesanFamily. Your picture may be published in an upcoming issue of the newspaper. We'll be right back. An update tonight on the rebuilding of Notre Dame. Officials say the roof of the Paris Cathedral is now secure. French police have released this drone footage of the cathedral's temporary roof. Investigators believe the center of the original roof is where the inferno began, toppling the church's spire. The investigation into the cause of the fire is still ongoing. More than 2,000 people attended a concert to benefit the rebuilding of Notre Dame. The 90-minute show was held at the National Shrine of the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C. and televised live on Net TV Friday. Performing was Johann Vexo, an organist from the Paris Cathedral, who was playing at the time the fire broke out. He described the moment the cathedral was evacuated during services.
I was playing the Mass and everything started, and after a few minutes, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, we could hear an alarm inside the cathedral during the gospel. The priest was reading the gospel, and this alarm sounded in the cathedral. Nobody was really worried or concerned about what was happening. We all thought that it was just like a dysfunction or a mistake.
After Friday's concert, Cardinal Donald Wuerl, the administrator for the Washington Archdiocese, announced the Archdiocese had donated $25,000 to rebuilding Notre Dame. Pope Francis is asking for help to combat something he has long condemned: gossip. He turned to a group of professional hairdressers and beauticians who witness the trait every day in their work.
Stimola soprattutto ad esercitare la vostra professione con stile cristiano, trattando i clienti con gentilezza e cortesia e offrendo loro sempre una parola buona di incoraggiamento, evitando di cedere alla tentazione del chiacchiericcio che facilmente si insinua anche nel vostro contesto lavorativo. Tutti lo sappiamo.
More than 200 hairdressers and beauticians were at the Vatican yesterday to honor their patron saint, Martin de Porres. That is Currents News. Please stay tuned. Coming up next on Net TV, the Mass of Hope and Healing, televised live from St. Athanasius Church. Thank you for joining us, because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.